Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Equalizer 3, starring Denzel Washington, Dakota Fanning, Eugenio Mastrandrea, forgive me if I said that wrong, David Denman, Gea Scodolaro, Remo Girone, Andrea Scarduzio, forgive me if I said that wrong, and Andrea Dodero, directed by Antoine Fuqua. Now, before I get into this movie, I had to watch it twice for this review. And is it as good as the first two movies? Well, or is it better, or is it worse? Let's get into this movie and we'll find out. We open in Sicily, Italy, with the father and son, as the father took something that never belonged to him to begin with, and the audience never learns what it is, which is kind of a problem from the get go, as he tells his son to stay in the truck, and he comes in and sees most of his bodyguards dead, except for a few, that as they hauled Robert McCall, returned by Denzel Washington, hostage until he kills them bastards up in the most brutal way possible. And this movie earns its R rating from the get go. While he comes out and encounters the son, and he shoots him, and the son shoots him in the back, and the boy runs away when Robert lets him get away. And we learn something about him as he drives away off screen. And he gets saved by Gio, played by Eugenio Mastrandrea, forgive me if I said that wrong, as well as Dr. Enzo Aricio, played by Remo Girone, whom I reviewed a couple of times in Ben Affleck's Live by Night, and he played Enzo Ferrari in not the Adam Driver one coming up, but in Ford versus Ferrari with Matt Damon and Christian Bale. And he heals Robert while he was knocked out. I like the fact that we learn Robert has a vulnerable side to him after getting shot, and I thought that was pretty well done. Robert wakes up and Enzo asks him who he is, and Robert asks where is he at, which is a place to be while in Italy. And he walks around town with a cane, and the cinematography looks gorgeous, as it makes me want to visit that part of Italy, as it is beautiful to watch. And there's cameras for the bad guys to watch over them, and I'll get to the bad guys a little later, but Robert finds a place to drink some tea, and a waitress named Amina, played by Gail Scodolaro, gives him coffee, and Geo checks on Robert while having coffee, and he brings his daughter Gabby and gives him his car keys for whenever he's ready to get out of town. And Gabby gives him some cookies in a bag, and at nighttime he calls the CIA and reaches Emma Collins, played by Dakota Fanning, at what a reunion after Man on Fire, as he calls as a concerned citizen, where he reports to dead people, and I really do like Dakota Fanning's character, as well as every character we're introduced to so far at this point in the movie. The next day comes, and Robert walks around with a cane, and a woman he passed by says, "Go slowly," which is good advice if you're on a cane and going upstairs. And he has lunch at the restaurant where he has coffee in the previous scene, and sees a man named Vincent Quaranta, forgive me if I said that wrong, played by Andrea Scarduzio, who was in the last Mission Impossible movie that came out earlier this summer, as he's beating up on Angelo, who's the owner of a fish store, which is a fucking brutal scene to watch as Robert walks by and witnesses what Vincent is doing there in the first place. And this is the best villain of the movie, in my opinion, not the brother, whom I'll get to in the next segment. In Naples, Vincent, and his gang are ruthless motherfuckers, while his brother Marco, played by Andrea Dodero, collects from a hotel clerk, and an elderly man wheels his chair out of the window to commit suicide, while Vincent wants Marco to collect from the town, while he has more important things to do, and he's ruthless too, but not as ruthless as Vincent, in my opinion. Robert begs Enzo to get some salmon for him, and while he does, Eminem tells Robert to not smell the fish, to look based on their eyes. And I really like their chemistry, as they look great together. Meanwhile, Collins meet along with Frank Conroy, played by David Denman, whom I just reviewed in Emancipation. Don't remember him in that movie, but have seen quite a few things he's been in, like The Gift and Brightburn, investigating the Sicily house. As Robert asks Enzo, "What do you see in him?" and he asked about if he's a good man or a bad man, but Robert unfortunately doesn't know, and the conversation between the two works quite well. Robert sees everybody running back because Marco burns Angelo's fish shop. As Robert sees it burning it down, and Robert decides what he should do for the town, as he, with some other townspeople, help Angelo out rebuilding the shop, while Geo looks for the men responsible for burning down the fish shop, and Amina asks Robert out after seeing how neat he is and who cooks for him, and he says his favorite dish at first is chili, but says spaghetti. And their chemistry is absolutely beautiful. Robert gets accepted as one of the townspeople. Meanwhile, he sits in the restaurant, and Collins takes a picture of him, and they talk about what happened in Sicily, as Denzel and Dakota Fanning work very well together, and their scenes are fire. And I'll see how that'll work. Well, maybe not, but here they work real well together, like they did on Man on Fire back in those 20 years ago almost. Geo gets a call about where Gabby is at, and one of her teachers says one of her officers took her home, and he goes back to the house and Marco's men and beating the shit out of him for investigating him and his goons, and he says next time it'll be Gabby who'll get hurt, and Robert witnesses his bruises after the brutal beating in Enzo's office. And the violence in this movie is brutal to watch at times, and this movie does earn an R rating as far as I'm concerned. Collins finds Robert climbing the stairs, and they talk about how he's an interesting person, not a person of interest. And I really like the writing in the movie, as it's pretty well done, and as this trilogy really grows on me. Robert is in the restaurant with Geo, his wife, and Gabby, while Marco comes up to Geo to ask him for a favor and to stay out of his business, while he comes up to Robert, and Robert prepares him as he twists his hand to gets it to level 3, while he doesn't want it to get to level 4 where he'll shit his pants, which is a brilliant way to teach the bad guys a lesson, in my opinion. Marco doesn't learn his lesson, and Robert kills the motherfucker as well as his goons, and that is how brilliant of an actor Denzel really is, in my opinion. Geo learns Marco is dead, and so does Vincent, while Collins gets a call from Frank about some terrorists blowing up a car, as I'm led to believe it was Vincent off screen. And she gets an interview with a man he can't interview, but she does anyway, and she gets information about the terrorists that did it, which is Vincent's men, while Marco's funeral, as they learn she is getting closer to who the killer really is, and the chief police gets beat up and his hand cut off by Vincent. And his goons, which is a fucking brutal scene. Just Jesus Christ, it really was. Collins' car gets blown up by Vincent, and it gets to her to the hospital, while Vincent calls out the man who killed Marco, and Geo gets shot in the ear until Robert shows up and confessed he did it to take his life, as the people march against Vincent, thanks to Enzo and cameras going on as they're going to put this on the internet, which was an interesting way to expose the bastard. Vincent goes to the house, and they have spaghetti and figure out a way to burn the town, and while the townspeople pray for their town to not burn down while blowing fireworks to celebrate their freedom, as Robert comes in and kills every single motherfucker in the house, including Vincent, as he sings while he slowly dies, which is kind of a funny choice by director Antoine Fuqua. Collins wakes up and sees Robert coming in for some money, $366,400 cash, to get to America for someone named Greg, whom he drove around in the second film, and asks her to give it to him and his wife back in Boston, Massachusetts, and he wants Collins to give it to him because her parents were in the previous two movies. Let me refresh your memory. She's Brian and Susan Plummer's daughter, and in which I did not see coming for this whole movie. And in case you don't know what I'm talking about, Brian was played by Bill Pullman, and Susan was Melissa Leo, aka Robert's best friend, as well as the director of the CIA, who is who were both in the first two movies, as he was led to believe she'll do the right thing, as Robert gives the little black book to Collins while Robert stays in town in Italy. And this is a good climax and ending of a pretty good trilogy, in my opinion. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 7.5 out of 10. I do like that we learned the main character has a vulnerable side to him, as that was pretty well done. And this movie has the best characters in the series, in my opinion, anyways. As this may be the best of the Equalizer trilogy, in my opinion, as well as it keeps growing and growing on me. The cinematography was gorgeous to watch, as it makes me want to visit that side of Italy. And it is beautiful to watch the chemistry between Robert and Amina having chemistry, while the dialogue works well, quite well, I'll say. And what a reunion between Denzel and Dakota Fanning after Man on Fire. And they work great together. The action is brutal to watch at times, which earns the R rating, and I really enjoyed the movie as it has a brilliant way to show the enemies they mean business, and I believe it from Denzel. And this is a recommendation, as this is a good conclusion and ending of a trilogy. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for not only returning to the Equalizer, which I have reviewed the first two movies, as well as Olympus Has Fallen, but as well as the entire Antoine Fuqua directorial retrospective. And until we get maybe his next film, it's time to get equal.